Hey everyone, thank you for viewing my presentation on the culture of Barbados. My name is Alice Montgomery and this is from Midway University, Nursing 340. The person I have interviewed is a 22-year-old female born in Brooklyn, New York to two parents that are from St. James, Barbados. For this presentation, we'll call her Mrs. C. She has two older siblings, both brothers. She reports no chief complaints, allergies, or medication use. However, she did state that her maternal grandmother is diagnosed with diabetes mellitus type 1 and her mother is diagnosed with diabetes mellitus type 2. Her father is diagnosed with hypertension and acid reflux. While interviewing Mrs. C, she explained that since Barbados is such a small island and in its own country, not a lot of people really know about their culture. Throughout this presentation, I will utilize this interview along with research to help better understand today's culture in Barbados. To understand the culture of Barbados, it is important to know the overview and historical facts about Barbados. Barbados is the easternmost island in the Caribbean and is relatively flat. The coastline is about 60 miles long, being 166 square miles total land area. It is totally surrounded by the Atlantic Ocean. They do have a tropical climate, and the population is 287,085 relatively in 2014. The historical background of Barbados. Barbados was England's first experimental tropical agriculture export colony and was successful for their first commercial crop, tobacco, enabled the accumulation of quick profits, which was later utilized to finance the shift to sugar production in the 1950s. A locally elected legislature of the House Assembly was formed in 1939 and ruled the island in tandem with the state-sanctioned religion, the Anglican Church. However, as the cost of white labor in England went up, planters, on the advice of Dutch and Sephardic merchants, turned to West Africa for their source of manpower. Black slaves were imported in large numbers from the Gold Coast region in particular, especially from what is today the country of Ghana. This shift in population patterns facilitated a process of creolization, which saw West African and West European culture patterns acting on each other under the influence of a small tropical island environment to produce a Barbadian variant of a wider West Indian culture. As a result, Barbados was the only one of the British islands which supported the passage of the act abolishing the slave trade, which slavery was abolished in 1834. The island gained full independence in 1966. It is the member of the Commonwealth, and the first leader of the Barbados as a free nation was the Right Honorable Errol Walton Barrow. Continuing on with the history of Barbados, in the 1900s, after World War II, for labor opportunities, Barbadians sought access to the United States, Canada, and Great Britain. After the Immigration Act of 1965 and Barbadians' independence, there was a new wave of Barbadians in the Northeast, 73% of them living in Brooklyn, New York by 1970. Remember, as I mentioned before, my client is from Brooklyn, New York. By 1990, there was a total of 33,178 Barbadian Americans, with 3/4 of them being foreign-born. So I want to talk about the bioculture ecology of Barbadians. They're very dark skin, they have dark eyes, dark, tight, curly hair. They don't call themselves African Americans, of course, if they live in America. They call themselves Barbadians or Bajans. The life expectancy for Barbadian men is 72 years of age. Females are 77 years of age. I've also listed for you the different age groups and the percentage compared in 2014. You can see that there's more middle-aged people compared to children and elderly. When I was talking to Mrs. C, I asked about, her attitude toward aging, and she says, we kind of age gracefully, saying that you can't really tell their age by the way they look. They don't have many wrinkles or graying hair. The elders try to stay active and independent as much as they can. She talked about her grandparents saying that they're in their 80s and they still live on their own. Really, the only time they utilize nursing assistants if they had a mental illness, such as Alzheimer's or dementia, or a physical illness that cripples them. As I was talking to Mrs. C, she tells me that their language is a dialect of English. It reflects a West African heritage, most likely being a British accent. Research that the literacy in Barbados is 99.7% total of the population, meaning that over the age of 15 they have attended school. So they're very, they believe in higher education. Their concept of time, they spend most of their time building their education when they're young, but as they get older they do spend their time working in their chosen career. They do enjoy social gatherings, spending time having public outings, and social, similar to Americans. When asked about death rituals, Mrs. C tells me that the burial services are very similar to Christianity, with church services along with awakenings and burials. She did mention that cremation wasn't very popular in Barbados back then, but now it's becoming popular due to restrictive space on the island. So cremation is more accepted these days. Family Row is an organization for Barbadians. Households range from single man or woman to mixed gender groups. 45% are married couples with children, 35% are single mothers with children. There's far more emotional support for single women with children these days. Mrs. C, talking about her upbringing, her parents were equal in decision making as well as providing for the family. Children are free to leave the house at any time. They're not obligated to take care of their parents. She said that they do respect their elders. However, the oldest or the youngest, they do not have to stay and take care of if they want to leave, go to college, live on their own, build their own families. They are allowed to do that. The healthcare practices in Barbadian culture is very similar to Western beliefs. They do believe in medicine practices. They believe in preventing and treating illnesses. You don't really need vaccinations to go Barbados. Mrs. C talked about how in mostly men, but women are known to do it as well, that they have a stoic personality. They kind of stick it out when they have pain or if they're starting to have symptoms. So they're not very open in reporting their symptoms. There is one large public hospital on the island called the Queen Elizabeth. They do offer a wide range of services, but they still do family doctors, primary care doctors to make home visits, as well as there's clinics on the island. The pregnancy and childbearing practices. They don't believe in abortions due to more family support when a single mother becomes pregnant. The whole family is involved in childcare, not just the parents, but aunts, uncles, cousins. They all get involved and help raise the children. They do not birth babies at home. It's mostly done in a hospital setting. Childbearing traditions emphasize gender-based family responsibilities, such as women are raised to do the housework versus the men focusing on working and providing for the family. However, talking to Miss C, she says that it's an equal partnership. Women can go out and work as well as men can help around the house. Similar practices are much like those in America. Women are free from dependency of childbearing, and they have fewer children these days because they're not obligated to have children. However, there is an increase in teenage pregnancies, and So the spirituality of Barbadians, more than 80% of the population claims to practice Christianity. Mrs. C's talked about that there's a growing small community that practices the religion of Rastafari. They believe in Haile Selassie as a god, and he will return to African members of the black community who are living in exile as the result of colonization and the slave trade. More than half of the Christians belong to the Church of England and attend churches such as Roman Catholics and Seventh-day Adventists. There is a small Jewish community that attends services in a synagogue, and a small East Indian community that practice Islam and Hinduism. There is a original practice called the Apostolic Spiritual Baptists, known as tie heads. They're known as tie heads because of the cloth turbans worn by both men and women. They sport colorful gowns and colors symbolic of particular qualities. They practice religion, foot stomping, hand clapping, and dancing. Mrs. C discusses the issues in Barbados today that college students are having a hard time finding jobs after graduation. Many of them are traveling to the U.S. for job opportunities. You can see that unemployment rates has increased to 11.8% in the first quarter of 2015 from 11.5% from the fourth quarter in the 2014. I also included social economic statuses. They have an elite and a large middle class group and a little to no lower class group. The Barbadian nutritional status, they do not eat much pork. Mrs. C talked about how, due to the slaughtering practice of pigs, pork is not one of their favorite meats that they eat. They do eat a lot of lamb, chicken, and beef. They're also known for their flying fish dish, as well as they eat a lot of vegetables and fruit. However, they do consume a lot of starches such as rice, okra, macaroni, and cornmeal. They're known for their cuckoo dish called the polenta, it has polenta grits, very creamy, made from cornmeal and okra. And due to the flying fish being breaded, they eat a lot of fried dishes. They have consume a high sodium intake. So later on in this presentation, we'll talk about some nursing implications dealing with their nutrition status. I want to talk about the high-risk behaviors. There's high-risk STDs among teenagers in Barbados due to lack of knowledge of contraceptive use and the disease itself. As we talked about in nutrition, they consume high intake of sodium. Their stoic personalities, some diseases go undiagnosed and untreated. Common diseases among Barbadians are hypertension, diabetes, mellitus, arthritis, and stroke. And I have also provided statistics of major diseases among Barbadians, such as diabetes mellitus, ischemic heart disease, and cerebral vascular disease. Nursing implications. I want to educate Mrs. C on her nutrition status, talk about dietary changes such as lowering sodium intake, encouraging her to continue on fruit, vegetable intake, and protein intake. According to the Diabetic Science Journal, salt intake is a critical role in regulating blood pressure and primary hypertension, and may potentially increase the risk of stroke. So I definitely want to try to inform her that high sodium is a risk for cardiovascular diseases. Another characteristic in Barbadian culture I want to educate on is the prevalent diseases. Since Mrs. C has family that has diabetes and hypertension, I just want to talk about risk factors such as behavior as well as genetic. Educate on the effects of these diseases on the body, and provide information on prevention methods. The research study that I've chosen is on diabetes and hypertension guidelines and the primary healthcare practitioner in Barbados. This focuses on knowledge, attitudes, practices, and barriers, and it's chosen a focus group study. The study was aimed to evaluate the knowledge and attitudes and practices of those primary care practitioners. There was 63 people, including physicians, nurses, dietitians, podiatrists, and pharmacists, and of course private practices of 20 people, including the same. The results were that there wasn't a good quality of, that practitioners thought they were given a good quality of care, but really there was significant deficiency in the frequency with which recommended processes of care were performed. So the implementation of the study was to help practitioners overcome those barriers in providing education not only to patients but as well as the practitioners and healthcare providers. Okay, everyone, that's it on my presentation. Thank you for listening in. I hope you learned a little bit about the culture of Barbados.